to talk really about ultimately growth, because that's what this thing is all about. Our savior is never has been the IMF and never will be the IMF. Our saving grace has to be the policies that we implement and the capacity of the Jamaican people to lift ourselves out of our difficulties. That is really the ultimate. No, we can't blame anybody. We can't say it's IMF fault, it's World Bank fault, it's IDB fault, or anybody else's fault. Ultimately, we in Jamaica must accept full responsibility for the kind of government that we have and the kind of country that we are prepared to run. Now, the first thing I found interesting, and most of you are so young that you need the benefit of this brief bit of education. Our introducer said that the Jamaican economy since 1962, since independence, quoted a World Bank document that said that the Jamaican economy has grown by an average of 0.6% since independence to now. 0.6%. So that is just over 0.5% growth per year for 50 years. And I found myself contemplating and looking and flashing back into the history and said, now hold on, but these people, these young people who are here would easily become disillusioned and maybe don't even understand what's going on. But let's disaggregate it briefly. In the 1960s, when the Jamaican Labour Party government was running the country, the economy grew by an annual average of 6% per year from 1962 to 1972. Not 0.6%, but 6% per year. And in 1971, the Jamaican economy grew by an amazing 11.5%, almost 12% growth in one single year in 1971. And when I reflect on that period of growth, and I realize that for 14 years under my friend Omar Davis as Minister of Finance, in that 18-year period as managing the country, the economy grew by just over 14%. No, I'm sorry. The economy grew by just over 12% in his 14 years. Just over 12%. Averaging 0.8% growth per year. So now, let's just go back briefly again. So we had that 6% growth. And we had 11.5% growth in 1 year, which was almost the same amount of growth achieved in 14 years by a Minister of Finance. Look at that comparison. Then in the 70s, we had a period of 7 consecutive years of negative growth. Many of them were 4%, 5% negative growth. That's when your averages come back now and bring them to below 1%. In the 80s, the Labour Party came back in power again. And what did we do? After we wrestled in the first half of the 1980s with a number of global conditions, including a fallout in the earnings in bauxite and alumina industry, we were able to stabilize the economy. We even had tensions with the IMF at the time, because we wanted to keep our exchange rate relatively stable. We introduced a system called the auction system, and we were able to keep the exchange rate stable at $5.50 for 3 years. The IMF wanted us to have the exchange rate in free fall, and we refused to have that. And what happened was another period of 6% growth came back to the Jamaican economy. The economy grew between 1986 and 1990, spilling over into the PNP administration, which had taken over in 1989. It grew again by 6% per year between 1986 and 1990. And what were the common factors of that facilitated that growth. A stable exchange rate was there. Relatively low interest rates, not low enough that I had wanted. In fact, by the time I became minister, I was able to bring interest rates down much lower than even at that time. But we also aggressively promoted investment. That's when I entered the public service in the 1980s. When I was first in Kingston and then went to New York and was in charge of the Overseas Investment Promotion Program into Jamaica. In that time, we were attracting 2 new investments per week into Jamaica, from both domestic and external sources. And that again led to 6% growth over a 5-year period. And then what happened? 18 years after that, after 89, we had annual average growth of 1% for 18 years. Then we took over again in the period 07 to 11. And not only did we inherit the history of low growth to no growth for 18 years, came the global economic recession, which was the worst global recession that Jamaica had seen in over 80 years. We had to hug that up, along with 18 years of 1% growth. That's what I inherited as Minister of Finance. And so, we brought the IMF, we entered into an agreement with the IMF. And I did something else too. I aggressively re-engaged our program of borrowing low-cost money from the other multilateral partners. The World Bank, the Inter-American Development Bank, the Caribbean Development Bank. As a matter of fact, over the period, I borrowed some $3 billion United States dollars, most of it at interest rates of less than 2% per year. It is significant because you have to compare that with what we were doing on the international capital markets before that under the previous finance minister, Dr. David. He was borrowing money on the international capital markets at 10, 11, and in one case he borrowed a couple $100 million from the Bank of Nova Scotia at 11.75% on the international capital markets. Those interest rates at that time are called junk bond rates, and those are the rates that we were borrowing money at. So, essentially, if you want to have the conditions for growth in your economy, there are major areas of macroeconomic stability that you need. You need to have relatively low interest rates. Jamaica has for too long been bred on high interest rates. And when I became minister, mortgage rates were averaging 18 to 20%. Young people like you could never have a dream or hope of ever borrowing money at those high interest rates. When I left as Minister of Finance, there were 2 financial institutions competing at mortgage rates of 9.4 and 9.5% respectively. You need low interest rates as part of a growth model. We need a stable exchange rate. Now, a stable exchange rate, ladies and gentlemen, is absolutely critical. My good friend Dr. King and others have said, let the exchange rate, it needs to become competitive. Let it be free floating and be competitive. Well, guess what? In Jamaica's experience, it has never led to more exports. Hear what my friend Mr. Cassidy has said? That we are importing so much less, so much more onions today than we were 10 or 20 years ago, despite all of this devaluation of the exchange rate. We have not seen exports increase in Jamaica as a result of the devaluation of the Jamaican dollar. That is that's not a postulation, that is a fact that I'm putting on the table. We have just not seen it. In fact, whenever the periods of stability in the exchange rate in Jamaica, that is when we have seen growth. You need a stable exchange rate, you need low interest rates, and you need relatively low inflation. Those are key 3 critical components to get investment going and to get growth going along, of course, with consumer confidence. And how do you achieve this low inflation? Well, that's a major challenge for us. We all know it. Major challenge. And I'm not absolving my party and my government from not having grabbed it, that issue of how we're going to deal with some elephants in the living room like energy. Because our energy policy in Jamaica has been a major part of what is like a virus that runs throughout the economy. That for as long as you don't fix the cost of energy problem, you're never going to achieve the levels of inflation that are in developed countries. You can't get 2% inflation when your JPS is charging you 40 cents US per kilowatt hour. Trinidad now has a promotion program trying to get more investments into their country. And you know what Trinidad has published on paper? They said that they are comparing their electricity rates in Trinidad with the rates in Jamaica. And they say that manufacturers in Trinidad can get electricity at 3.5 to 4 US cents per kilowatt hour. And then they proudly say, but in Jamaica, you have to pay 40 cents US per kilowatt hour. And by the way, JPS has applied for a 21% increase. And if they get it, it means your rate is headed for 50 cents US per kilowatt hour. So kiss export goodbye under those circumstances. It's just not going to work. Now we are being promised electricity, new forms of electricity by 2017. But it's more likely 2018 before we're going to get electricity under the present model. I go further to say that under the present model, they are saying JPS is going to produce 120 megawatts of propane in Trelawney, 190 megawatts of LNG in Old Harbour, and another some amount somewhere else. But they haven't told us how it's going to be financed. We don't know how it's going to be financed. The JPS doesn't know how it's going to be financed because the JPS themselves are compromised in terms of their own financial integrity in the global market. So to this moment, we don't know how it is actually going to be financed. Let me tell you, I'm going to have to come down because this thing, it could take us all evening. But let me just say to you as I wrap up, that one of the areas in which there is a sharp difference between the present government and present Minister of Finance and myself is that you cannot follow IMF dogma blindly. You, as a government, we have to do things that only the government can do. And Dr. Horton mentioned it, growth inducement strategies. The last thing I did before coming down as Minister of Finance, we worked with the Planning Institute of Jamaica and we published a document called Growth Inducement Strategy. Published it. And before it was even published, I had put in place certain initiatives that were a part of the growth process. I sharply reduced the cost of transaction for land transfer. Transfer taxes and stamp duties were sharply reduced. I abolished death taxes, estate taxes, because lots of properties were being held up because the government wanted to first get, if you're a beneficiary of your father or somebody has died and left land for you, they wanted you to pay the taxes up front before they would transfer the land into your name. But alas, you don't have the money. You have the debt left, but you don't have the money. So I abolished the tax. And I was pleased to see, in talking to the Registrar General recently, that they have actually speeded up the process of properties that were just lying fallow, and there was no movement. There is no movement of property settlements now as a result of the reduction and the elimination of the death taxes. What has the Minister of Finance come and done now? In terms of transfer tax and stamp duty, he has increased it again. And people in the industry have told me that increasing it again has actually put a damper on real estate transactions once more. That one is just one example of the kind of initiative that can be taken by government. That does not mean you're going to give up revenue. Because if you lower your taxes on transfer tax and stamp duties, and you increase the volume of transactions, then you're actually going to make more money, not less money. But you have to be a businessman to think like that. Right? As the minister came into power, the IMF had them agreement. They said, no, the IMF never agreed with me in the first place anyway. So the IMF just demand, put back the tax on transfer taxes and stamp duties. Put it back on a range of other things. The tax reform that is much touted right now, I am predicting, is not a tax reform that is going to be something that is going to induce growth. If you look at the tourism sector alone, what is proposed in the tax reform for the tourism sector is not seen to be attractive when compared with what the other people in the tourism market in the Caribbean region is offering. Equally, the manufacturers now are faced with paying certain taxes, including general consumption taxes on imports, that they didn't have to pay when I was Minister of Finance. So tax reform is a work in progress, and the minister has given me the assurance that he's prepared to look on a continuing basis to see how we can recalibrate tax reform to make it more as an instrument of stimulating investment and growth. Other reforms are there. IMF locked me down because I never implemented them within 2 years. Public sector reform, pension reform. This government has gotten a blight till 2016 with those. Countryman said, donkey said the world on level. Right? Or the ground, donkey said the ground at level. Right? They have gotten all of this reprieve to get this thing done, and guess what? If you don't get the bureaucracy reformed quickly, the bureaucracy is part of the hindrance to growth in the economy, and that is a major elephant in the living room. I end by saying this to you. While we have the IMF agreement, and I'm in broad agreement with it, we have to control expenditure, no question about it. But mark my word, we also have to set priorities. Can I give you one example? Because we jump off a deep end and like a missionary who didn't believe in free market before. Now you want to believe in it on IMF. Anything IMF say, you just dive off the end of the diving board and do what they say. As chairman of the Public Accounts Committee, I listened to the Jamaica Fire Brigade that appeared before me today. Jamaica Fire Brigade. And do you know what it will cost the Jamaica Fire Brigade to repair 5,000 hydrants that are not functioning, 13 fire units that are out in need of repair, and 3 fire ambulances that need repair? You know what that costs to fix? You know what the fire brigade needs to fix those? $121.6 million Jamaican dollars. And we brag that we have passed our primary surplus targets. And we brag that we have contained expenditure by several $billion under expenditure. And we cannot give the fire brigade $121.6 million to repair 5,000 fire hydrants, 13 fire units, and 3 fire ambulances to make the Jamaican people safer. That is a disgrace. Our government must have a conscience and be able to set priorities and know that yes, you're passing the IMF test, but there are some other tests you can still pass, including the fire brigade test. There's one final test I leave that is very close to my heart, and when Professor Horton and Mr. Casserly spoke, they both have spoken about our human resource situation. Ladies and gentlemen, here's how I end. Understand this. Jamaica has a crisis. The biggest crisis we have, is not crime, believe it or not. The biggest crisis, even as the polls say that the biggest crisis is unemployment, it's still not the biggest crisis. You know what our biggest crisis is? A crisis of human underdevelopment. A crisis of human underdevelopment. You are here at this institution. Thank God you're here and I'm happy for you. But the majority of our Jamaicans will never get this opportunity on the way at where we are operating. They don't, from the beginning of the education system, they are at a disadvantage. Because we put them into glorified daycare centers from 3 to 6. And when they start matriculation for grade 1 at 6 years old, they are illiterate. They can't read, they can't write, they can't understand. And that follows the children right through the system. I'm talking about the majority, I'm not talking about the Mona Prep people and the Immaculate people and the Bel Air people. I'm talking about the majority of the people that we claim that we love so much, poor people. Those are the people who are being compromised because from 3 to 6 years old they are not being prepared. Trinidad, I was flying from Trinidad a few weeks ago, and a former permanent secretary there told me, he said, Mr. Shaw, over the past 5 years, spanning 2 government administrations, the Trinidadians made a decision to take over the education system. Train our teachers, train their teachers, and make sure those children start to get proper education from 3. What do we have here? We have 4,000 teachers. 2,000 of them are underemployed in the system. 2,000 more are unemployed but trained. Couldn't we take those 4,000 teachers and retrain them into early childhood education and deploy them and take over the early childhood education system? Leave the private schools, let them go on, take over all of those that are below standard. The cost of it is $10 billion a year. Bobby Pickersgill would call that chicken feed. $10 billion a year. That's what it costs. And we have $120 billion sitting in the Petro-Carib fund earning interest. Right now. If we have the will, we can do it. If we have the will to set the priorities, we can operate within the framework of the IMF agreement. That is my argument. God bless you. Thank you very much.